Freight brokers versus motor carriers. Besides the fact that one owns equipment and the other one doesn't, most people don't really understand the unique values that each provide to shippers. Well, in this video, we'll cover the advantages of each of them and how shippers really do treat them differently, and sometimes the same, well, at least when it benefits them. I'm Benjamin Kowalski with Freight 360, where we provide the latest transportation sales tips and training videos to help you reach your goals faster. If you'd like to learn more, please check out the comments for a link to our course, Freight Broker Basics. And if you're a fan of the content, please support us by crushing that like button and sharing us with all of your colleagues. Okay, let's start with motor carriers. What I want you to picture is you have 5 drivers and we'll say 5 trucks. The first thing to know is that each of them only earns money when they are loaded with cargo and rolling down the road. And that seems pretty obvious, right? But what else it does mean is that when all of your equipment only makes money when they're loaded and rolling. It means that anytime your trucks are idle or parked, you're not making any money, right? You're not earning any revenue. And the big takeaway from this point is that for a carrier to operate profitably, they want as much predictability as they can get. So it's very common for shippers to spend more time going through more of their lanes with each of their motor carriers. They do this so that the motor carrier can look at the other lanes they run throughout their week and the other customers they service, so that they can determine if their drivers will be able to accommodate the shipments or the loads the shipper is asking you to bid on or run, right? So remember that a motor carrier needs time to make sure their truck is empty and can make the pickup by a certain day and time, right? The more convenient the lane is to the carrier, the more likely they are to desire that lane. And the shippers design the bid process specifically to capitalize on these relationships. Sometimes a carrier will negotiate a rate that is maybe less than market. And they do this because it's a very desirable lane for them. So for example, maybe a carrier has a customer they've been working with for years, and the cargo, the loading times, the load weights, the volumes are all favorable to that motor carrier. And every week, that customer has a load that we'll say delivers 250 miles away from where that driver actually lives at the end of the week, right? And that driver, we'll say, usually just deadheads the empty miles to make it home to be with their family for the weekend. Now, if there is a shipper with a load available every single week, at that time, he's usually empty, and that loads and delivers, we'll say 5 miles from the driver's house, right? It's very likely that that driver is going to be willing to run this load for a discount, a lower than market rate. And the reason for this is the driver negotiates that discount with the shipper so that the shipper is motivated to give them the load every single week no matter what's going on. And in this instance, it works out for both of them, right? The shipper gets a little bit less than market rate, and the carrier can rely on that few extra $100 every single week without having to drive home on the empty miles. More than they would have made otherwise, and the shipper gets the discount for it. Makes sense, right? This is one of the reasons that as a broker, when you are quoting market rates, the shipper may tell you the truth when they're saying, hey, you're way too expensive on this lane, right? The shipper is comparing apples to oranges, or in this case, motor carriers to freight brokers. Now, freight brokerages operate much differently than motor carriers. There aren't any truck payments, there aren't any drivers to make sure you keep them running as much as legally possible. The largest cost for a freight brokerage is labor and time. Paying people to research the market on the lanes every single day and to make contact and relationships with as many shippers and carriers as possible. The value provided by the brokerage isn't predictability, it's access to the open trucking market. From a shipper's point of view, the reason they are working with a freight brokerage is better access to the market. And why shippers need access to the market is for 2 major reasons: time and service levels. Let's cover each of them separately. And we're gonna cover time first. Remember that motor carriers rely on predictability to position their trucks so that they're empty and near the pickup by the time they are needed by the shipper. When a shipper has freight that comes in unexpectedly, they might not have days or weeks of notice. Like when a customer needs an extra truckload of material from that shipper the next day, right? Well, when that order comes through the sales department of the shipper and makes its way all the way through to the shipping department, there may only be a few hours before it needs to pick up to make the delivery on time. Those orders aren't a good fit for direct relationships with motor carriers. They almost always will be tendered to a freight brokerage that can access every empty truck within a couple hundred miles that can make that pickup on time and, more importantly, meet the shipper's procurement requirements. That's why a shipper almost is always working with at least one or two brokerages, no matter how busy or how slow the market actually is. The second is service. Motor carriers are driving lots of miles and have to rely on shippers and receivers to both load and unload in certain amounts of time. Not only do things happen on the road, like traffic accidents, weather can cause drivers to miss pickup, but also, again, previous shippers or receivers' loading time can also cause a driver to miss a pickup and create an issue for a shipper, even though there was no fault of the driver. Things happen, right? Well, when a shipper has a load that is required to deliver on a certain date at a certain time, the shipper needs to access the market of available trucks so that that shipper can maintain their service levels they promised to the customers buying their products. That's why they need freight brokerages. The big takeaway from these differences are that shippers have different types of categories of freight. They have loads that move as scheduled and are known about long before they're going to need picked up. And they have other loads that come in a much shorter time frame or even last minute and still need moved on time and on schedule. And each type of freight is usually a better fit for either a motor carrier or a freight brokerage. So next time you're on the phone with a prospect or a customer, ask more questions when the shipper asks you for a quote on that load. Ask if this is a last-minute order that just came through, or if this was a scheduled load and became available because the scheduled truck couldn't make the pickup. Ask if it still needs to be picked up and delivered on the previously scheduled dates. If it does, it's very likely that this load will need to go to a freight brokerage. If it doesn't need picked up on the previously scheduled date and time, then they have to wait for the scheduled truck that couldn't arrive today to arrive late, for instance, tomorrow. Then you can ask the shipper, your prospect, hey, would your customer have an issue if this doesn't get delivered when they expected it? These are the questions that will better help you identify opportunities as a freight brokerage or as a motor carrier. For more tips and training, be sure to watch our weekly podcast on this channel and check out the description for links to private coaching and our freight brokerage course, Freight Broker Basics. Because remember, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.